Hello everybody, welcome back. Thanks for tuning in to another episode here in the series. My name is Dominic and I'm the host of the Android Factory. Last episode we went ahead and incorporated our nav host fragment at the activity level here to kind of follow best practices here for the single activity architecture. We built out the nav graph here. We just have a single fragment at the moment that we see over here. So if you missed it, I'll link a card in the top right. And today we're going to go ahead and hook up a little bottom nav tab view at the bottom to kind of allow for some more tabs, some more navigation, and just further the nav graph discussion. As we get started here, just one other thing I wanted to note. At the end of the week here on Friday, I am going to be traveling for 2 weeks to Croatia on a vacation, so videos will stop coming out during that time, but I will definitely still be available and hope to connect with you all on social. So I'm going to take a little bit of a break, but when we get back, we will jump right back into things, and I'll at least try to get obviously this video and maybe one other video out before I depart. But as we get started here, we need to add in a new UI element, and that new UI element is going to be a part of the material components, and it's going to be called the BottomNavgiationView. So we'll just go ahead and click that in. Set our width here to match parent, and we'll set the height to wrap content. Obviously we are going to have to give it an ID, and then we're going to tell it to be at the bottom of the parent here, so that we have it aligned down here. The other thing that we need to do here is that we need to adjust our fragment container view for the bottom to the top of the bottom navigation view so that it doesn't overlap or anything along those lines. Perfect. So we've updated our layout here. The last thing we need is we need to actually modify we need to add in the particular menu field here to the bottom navigation view so that it understands what should actually be displayed in the navigation view. So if we open up our little project view here, we don't have a menu folder at the moment, but that's okay. I think we can just go ahead and say new Android resource file. We're going to name this menu bottom nav. We're going to change this to be a resource type menu, similarly to before, where we didn't have that menu directory, but then when we go ahead and create the file, Android Studio builds it for us. Same thing happened with navigation when we did that, if you remember. Menus, in my opinion, are easiest to work with, definitely in the XML. But inside of here, we're going to go ahead and give things particular IDs, and these are actually more important than you would think because of the way it connects up with our nav graph. So actually, the IDs here need to match the IDs listed in our nav graph. So if we just go ahead and copy this products list fragment, and we pop that in there, this will all start to come together. We also need a few other things in here, I believe. Yeah, so it looks like all that we need here is an ID and a title, and everything stops complaining. This is basically telling us we shouldn't hard code it, of course, yada yada. But what we do need here is we do need a particular icon to display here. So what we could do is we can actually use our resource manager here to actually fetch particular icons. So if we click over to that resource manager and then this plus sign, vector asset, we can click on have this clip art selected and then click on this, and this here is going to be Android Studio pulling for the material icons that you can find online, that is used all throughout different Android applications, and it's a really helpful tool to find icons when you are an individual developer because you don't have, or typically you don't have, a design capability to build these icons yourself and have them look good. Also, we can get these as SVGs, which is the most important, so that everything, the graphics scale at all the different densities and whatnot. So I think I've looked before, you can scroll through this entire list if you really want to see what's available, or you can filter things down. So I'm going to go with this view list. The other thing you can do in the second drop down is you can actually change the way that the icons are tinted or created or whatever the case is. So you could see two-tone here kind of vastly changes that. Outlined just kind of doesn't allow things to be filled in if it can't. And then round I normally like to do just because it kind of smooths out some of the edges there. So we're going to go ahead with this view list icon, click OK. You could rename the icon here. I'm just going to say IC list 24, sure, 24 by 24, gives you the black color so you can tint it. You can click next so you'll see exactly where all this stuff is going and how it's working, and then you click finish. And then we can see it there. It is available in all of our in this view, which kind of declares just in this case the drawable folder. But if we bounce back to the project view, we can go ahead and open our drawable folder and we see that we have it there. I guess this is another impromptu teaching moment, but you see how this thing is red here versus the blue and green. When it's red, it means that it's not being tracked by Git, but we can go ahead and change that by going over, right-clicking, finding Git, and then finding the add, or I guess Control-Alt-A, and then there we go. It gets added into Git, and it will now be part of version control. So we can go ahead and in here just add in IC list. And the other thing that we're going to do here is we're going to build out another item here, and it's going to be known as the profile fragment. And let me get a different icon here in a second. Cool, perfect. So I just downloaded this IC person 24. You can see it here. Pretty straightforward icon, and then updated the title to say profile. So we are all good here with our menu. We can go ahead and bounce over to the activity, and then here we can reference it with the app menu, bottom nav menu, and we can see down here now in the editor that there is a particular icon, there is a particular text, and that does correlate to exactly what we would expect. There's one other attribute here on the bottom navigation view that's worth talking about called the label visibility mode. And we do have a few options here: auto, labeled, selected, and unlabeled. I'm going to go ahead and leave it at labeled, but basically once we get past 3, I believe it is, icons down here, this field allows you to control how the text and the icons are supposed to work, as far as if the labels are always there, if the label is only present on the one you've selected. And so it's just nice to have control over that. The labeled attribute will make sure that they are always labeled, whether they're selected or unselected, so it will appear exactly like you see in the editor. Other than that, we do have to bounce over to our main activity here and just do one more bit of configuration. And just like we had done here where we fetched the nav host, we got the nav controller, and then we set up our action bar, we just need to set up the bottom navigation with our nav graph implementation. It is a little bit different here as far as the syntax, so it's navigation UI dot, I believe there's a handful of them here set up with nav controller. We can see one of them is the navigation bar view. So we can very easily just reference that. We could say binding.BottomNavigationView, and then I think it needs the nav controller. And I believe that's about it, which is great. So now we should have our bottom nav set up. And sorry, I know I said the last thing, but we obviously need to go ahead and create this profile fragment here. And we need to do so not only in our nav graph, but also in our code. So I'm just going to bounce over here, quickly create a new fragment for us here. Okay, quickly create a new fragment for us here. I don't know why that didn't work the first time. We're going to call this one just the simple profile fragment. Nothing too crazy here. We are just going to extend fragment to get things up and running. All right, so I copied over basically the bare bones implementation from the products list fragment. So we have our binding set up. On create view, we create the binding. On view created, we have nothing. On destroy view, we null out our binding. Basically the exact bare bones that we need for a fragment. However, I do want to show one little difference here that we can actually make to basically remove the need for some of these functions here. If we take a look at the fragment implementation, we do have the layout res content layout ID as a potential parameter that you could pass in here. So we could do something like r.layout.fragmentProfile inside of the constructor of the fragment. And what that will do, if we actually take a look at the super of, take a look at this. So if we take a look at this, the M content layout ID is set in the constructor there from what we had just done, the r.layout.fragmentProfile. And so if it detects that it is non-zero, which is true in this case now, it will go ahead and actually inflate that view for us. Otherwise, this function will return null. So that is why we end up overriding this function a lot of times and doing something inside of here and then returning the binding.root, which is, again, of course, a view. In this case, it's a constraint layout, but that extends view, so this function is satisfied. If we go ahead and just add in the r.layout.profile here, we don't actually need this function at all. And instead what we can do is inside of our onViewCreated, we can go ahead and do something exactly like this, where instead of actually inflating the view and using the inflator and the container that's passed to us, that all happens under the hood because we've given the base fragment implementation the actual ID that we need to inflate. And then otherwise here we can do this to bind this binding to this particular view. And what that affords us is deleting that. So it cleans up things just a little bit more. The only thing is that you need to remember to do this before you access the binding, because otherwise this will give you a crash because it is obviously null to start. So at this point it's safe. After line 17 it's safe to go ahead and use the binding variable. It does clean up a little bit of the fragment implementation, which is pretty nice. And then we can maybe uplift this one to do it as well. Not that big of a deal. But anyway, I digress. Sorry for that little additional tidbit there. But we can go ahead and bounce over to our nav graph. Basically going to copy this exact thing because it's just going to differ in a few areas. So we'll say this is the ID of profile fragment, and then this will be the profile fragment. This is going to be updated to, let's just say, profile. And let's also change this to just say something a little bit less robotic, and it'll say like all products, and then profile, and then our layout as well, we can do fragment profile. Go ahead and I believe it is this little icon here with the stars. We can go ahead and click this, and now we see that this area kind of gets nice and cleaned up for us, which is wonderful. Okay, cool. So actually, I think that's it. If we go ahead and rerun things here, we will see what happens. If you made it this far in the video, though, I'd really appreciate a like. I'd really appreciate a comment on what you think so far. And consider subscribing if you are brand new and if you don't want to miss out on what's to come here. Okay, so everything booted up here. We have all products in the top. That makes sense because of how we define things in our nav graph. We could scroll here. I'm sure we could favorite things, and this will all work exactly as it was before. I'm not worried about that. If we go ahead and click the profile now, we can see that we navigate over to profile. We can go back to list here, and we can just go back and forth. As we see up here, there actually is an issue, but there's also something positive happening. Obviously, the name is changing here. Again, that is coming from this Android label here, and we have set things up as the profile. But we see this back arrow, and that is a little problematic because we are at what is called a top-level fragment, right? Like, what is this? Why is there a back arrow here when you can just, navigate between these two? I actually don't even know what happens. Does it go back? Doesn't even do anything. Interesting. Right. Because I don't think I set that up. But also, the point is it shouldn't be there because there's no real distinction of how to go backwards from this point because you could have gotten here from anywhere. It's a top-level fragment. That's just a weird UI. So one thing that we can go ahead and do here, as I mentioned in the last episode, there is another option here for the app bar configuration that can be used inside of this setup action bar with nav controller function. So we're going to go ahead and define that. We're going to say app bar configuration equals app bar configuration, and there are a few different constructors here that we can go ahead and use. The one that we care about to solve this problem is actually the third one listed there in that little balloon, where the first variable here is a top-level destination IDs, and if we see it's a set of integers. So let's go ahead and just define that. We're going to say set of, and in here we can go ahead and define the IDs of the fragments that we want to declare as the top-level destinations. In this case, it's very obvious because we have these two things down here, the list and the fragment views or fragments. So we're just going to go ahead and say r.id products list fragment, and then r.id.profile fragment. Wonderful. Then we can go ahead and take this app bar configuration and we can go ahead and pass that into the setup action bar with nav controller. And when we go ahead and rerun things here, we've now instructed the navigation components that, hey, both of these destinations are top level, so there's no reason to apply that back arrow there. You see that it's gone now. There is no immediate way for the user to go back. Yeah, I think the actual device button is still going to work. That's still going to trigger a back, and there is an inherent back stack, or at least it will navigate backwards if it detects that the start destination is not the current destination the user is on. So if we add 3 more fragments to the bottom here, if it's on any of them, you can go ahead and hit the back button, and it should go back to the start destination. And then if you go back again, obviously you are now outside of the application. But that is about it. I think there was a little bit of learning on the fly there that I was explaining, whether it was something with Git, whether it was something with the fragment constructor, and then obviously the content for the video. So I hope I didn't jump around too much. I hope you did learn something here. This app bar configuration is super helpful, and obviously as we add additional fragments in, we'll just have to come in here and add in another, ID for a particular fragment. We can repeat that process to ensure that the navigation toolbar and all that kind of stuff works as expected, and we'll just handle that as we move on. But that's about it, folks. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Have a great day.